Good afternoon and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen and I'm the Director of Communications at PFLAG National, coming to you from lovely Burbank, California today. And as usual, we'll be taking your comments and questions on Twitter, Facebook, and on YouTube. I'm excited and happy as always to introduce my colleague and partner in crime, Jean Marie Navetta, PFLAG National's Director of Learning and Inclusion.
Hello, Liz. Hello, Liz, and hello, everybody from Palm Springs, California, where we're still sheltering in place. If it's Thursday, it means I've brushed my hair and it's time to do something to talk about live. And I'm really excited about today's conversation. It's one that we've wanted to have for a long time, and we have the perfect people to join us today. So for those of you who are joining online and would like to participate in the discussion or maybe have this discussion later, please visit straightforequality.org and click on discussion series to access the link to this article and to the questions that we're going to be using. So today's article is entitled The Loneliness of Being Queer and Muslim. It appeared in the New Arab publication, and the author was Anikwa Chowdhury. So in this article, she does a really incredible job of talking about many of the challenges that people who are both queer and Muslim experience. There was one quote from the article where she was interviewing somebody, and there was an individual who said, the media has tried to control the narrative about queer Islamic identities for too long, often thrusting us into a horrific culture war as if Islam is the mortal enemy of queer identity. And we know that that is not true. So this is why we want to have a conversation today. So for those of you who are participating, you've got the article, and I would like to bring in our two guests for today's conversation. First, I'd like to introduce Noor Pervez, who is an organizer. He focuses on racial, disability, trans, and queer justice, and is a member of the Muslim Youth Leadership Council. Welcome, Noor. I'd like to also introduce Aruna Rao, who is a member, who is actually the founder of Desi Rainbow Parents and Allies. She's the mom of a young adult who identifies as both trans and queer. And Desi Rainbow is an organization that supports the families of South Asian LGBTQ people. She is also a member of the PFLAG National Board. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation. We're really excited about this one. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of the author's perspective in this article. So, she writes that it took me 3 years to admit even to myself that I was bisexual, and even longer to tell other people. And then talks about how that conflict with her religious identity created a lot of unusual moments and things to navigate for her. So for both of you, I would love to hear, and I know you come from very different backgrounds, Noor, maybe you can start. Do you think that this experience of having to navigate these two identities is the experience of many queer Muslims? And what other aspects of their identity do you think impacts their experiences?
Oh, I think it's absolutely common. And I think the reason for that is that despite the fact that queer Muslims have a place historically within Islam and across many cultures, a lot of us haven't been encouraged to learn that part of our history, and a lot of us haven't been encouraged to learn about the fact that, like, throughout Islamic history, throughout the history of a lot of like countries that have primarily Muslims within them, there's been a lot of us. And it can feel very isolating, and it can feel, like the author mentioned, like this feeling that you're the only one that's ever existed. I find that particularly among like people who are newer to the community, there's this very strong sense that like people don't know where to look or where to start in terms of finding community. Mm-hmm. And once we've found community, it can be really challenging based on other intersections of identity to kind of make your way in and to understand and approach like the traditions that already exist. So for example, when we're talking about intersections that can make this more difficult, disability, race, poverty levels, just all of that wrapped together can make it really challenging, both to find an entry point, but also to participate within the larger community.
That's really interesting. Do you think, because you did mention disability, and I want to actually ask about that specific question, do you think that right now with the situation of COVID, that any of that has been exacerbated, as well as sort of the political climate that it has created around it?
In terms of like the experiences of queer Muslims feeling isolated?
especially for those who are also people with disabilities?
I would argue the opposite has been the case in terms of like finding community. So I'm actually the accessibility director for a group called Masjid Al Rabia, which works with multiply marginalized Muslims. We try to go for the term an Islam where nobody is left behind. And we tend to draw a lot of disabled Muslims. We draw a lot of LGBT Muslims. And one thing that we've realized fairly quickly is that COVID has made it so that people are actively looking for their communities online a lot more so than before. So a lot of people, like Masjid Al Rabia has already been very online. Like we've always had most of our services available simulcasting between online and Zoom and also in person. Mm-hmm. But we have a lot of people finding us for the first time now because people who are in, say, Australia or in other countries who might not otherwise have thought to look for us are actively seeking us out because they're like, well, I can't actively seek out either the positive community that I have here, or if they don't have that positive community, they're seeking it out elsewhere.
That's fascinating. Thank you. And I've never been happier to stand corrected on a fact in my whole life. That's actually a really incredible outcome of some of what we're grappling with. Aruna, could you talk a little bit about it? Because I know you're coming from a different place. Do you think that this experience of having to sort of pick between identities or have these very complicated navigations of identity is in fact still the experience of many queer Muslims?
Yes, and I do want to make clear that I myself am not a Muslim. I grew up in India in a multi-religious city, and obviously I'm familiar with the teachings of Islam to a limited extent. But I want to speak actually a little bit more from my perspective as someone who is an immigrant and who actually has had to navigate some of these issues for my own family and in my work. I have definitely come across people who are Muslim and who are dealing with both sides of the equation, both as queer or LGBTQ folk and as family members. So there's a lot of navigation that happens in terms of, for as Noor can speak, clearly to this experience of, growing up, being raised within a faith tradition, and then feeling that you don't really fit in with your own family, with your extended community. Mm-hmm. And on the other side, the parents' experience is about experiencing a lot of shame, and therefore also feeling ostracized and cut off from the faith community and from the cultural community. So both of these are definitely very common experiences. Mm-hmm. I hear them all the time in the course of the parent support that I do and the LGBTQ folk support that I do. And one thing I did want to reinforce is actually Noor's experience is actually true for me as well. And I think for a lot of other marginalized communities, that COVID, though it has kind of caused endless suffering for so many people, has also opened up the world in some ways which we had never expected before. And again, we have to recognize that those of us who have the privilege to have access to the internet mm-hmm. and the ability to be here are really the ones who are benefiting. But I personally have experienced a lot of connection at this time.
And I think that's an incredible, sort of an incredible perspective on what is actually happening out there and how, and the results of what our navigation of this experience has actually looked like. And I think, especially in marginalized communities, this has been kind of an unexpected boost to meeting each other. So I want to talk a little bit about how people actually navigate their identities, because I mean, I think for anyone who is a person of faith and who is either LGBTQ identified or the family member of someone who is, this navigating these two identities often becomes one of the first projects that they have. So the question that I have, it's sort of it is a two-part one. It's not sort of. So the first one is, are you seeing people navigating this and still trying to do it? And based on your experiences, are you seeing more people sort of coming out on the other side of this saying, I don't have to choose between my, my sexual orientation, gender identity, and my religion. I can in fact be both. And could both of you talk a little bit about how people are getting to that point? Is it a matter of finding community? Is it a matter of finding resources? Nor you started by saying we're not exposed to all of the aspects of our religious texts to understand them in these ways. What things do you think are contributing to helping people sort of take this journey?
Absolutely. I feel like the biggest factor for the majority of people I've met has been finding community and finding people that are like them that have done this before. And by this, I mean like navigating this particular journey and trying to understand and kind of reconcile what a lot of the culture around us has taught us about Islam and queerness, and navigating what our personal relationship to Islam itself is as queer people. I've found that for a lot of us, it's kind of a mentor-mentee kind of thing that happens where, say, someone will turn up to a conference and go to a Muslim-oriented space, or say maybe a prayer space at Creating Change or something.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll seek out people who have either done this before or who might have positions as faith leaders. And they'll come to us and they'll say, how do I start? How do we get through this? And how do we kind of pour our way through all of that? And admittedly, again, this is where we get back into class privilege as kind of a complicating factor, and disability as a complicating factor, because getting to a conference can be really, really expensive. Mm-hmm. And you'll see this same story kind of play out in online spaces and in, if you're fortunate enough to have access to an Accepting Quran group, that kind of thing, where people will kind of go, I'm new, I'm learning, and I want to better understand how to accept myself and how to understand my history. So that's kind of been the main route that I've seen people take. But there's a lot of ways to get to this particular bridge. The other big kind of cross I've seen people use is finding representation within Islamic text and Islamic history, because seeing yourself represented there tells us we've always been here. And if we've always been here, if we've always been a part of the culture, then surely any type of thing that says that we don't belong here is either misguided or has been shaped by some type of other agenda.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what you were just saying just so makes the case for those people who are able to talk about their religion and are able to talk about identity, being out there to have those conversations, because it seems like so much of it happens in those, I love that you said, sort of mentoring relationships of people who have done it versus people who are starting the journey. Aruna, what are you seeing? Because you're seeing this more from the family perspective and the family side. So can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, sure. And actually, I'm actually in a position where, wonderfully enough, I'm actually seeing it from an intergenerational perspective. So I know, Jean Marie, and Noor actually has been a part of this process as well, where for the past month, Desi Rainbow Parents has been hosting a series of faith and family discussions. And we decided to just focus on all the various faiths that we could, think of from South Asia. Starting with Christianity, and we're actually ending with Buddhism this Friday. And each of them is basically led by either an LGBTQ identified person or an ally. And Noor led our session on Islam. And what I saw there is it usually does tend to be the bulk of the population there, of people there who are seeking community, are themselves LGBTQ identified. And I think that says a lot for the fact that these are people who are seeking this community, and the older folk or the parents and the allies are still unsure whether there is space for them here or how to access this. And what Noor mentioned is entirely true. There are some amazing organizations that are doing great work. Noor mentioned Masjid Al Rabia. I'm familiar with Muslims for Progressive Values. My friend Kandil Javed is part of that organization. And so they are doing this work where queer Muslims are organizing, or at least being able to support one another and create resources for one another. There is still no resource for families, for people who are, kind of struggling with reconciling those lessons they were taught as children, and then basically trying to reconcile that with their love for their kids, or, trying to find out, is this really something that we can actually work together for? And I'm hoping this space will come into existence in our community. I think when Noor led that session and there were a few parents there, I think it's a beautiful thing to see when you have, across that generational divide, you have folks saying, okay, so we are able to be in this space together, and, be able to pray together. I thought that was beautiful too. Noor led a prayer where all of us participated. And I think that's the kind of space that I want to see come into being over here.
And I think I appreciate that both of you did talk about accessing these spaces still remains a privilege for many, many people, whether it is physically being in the same space for a variety of reasons, or even getting online. But the fact that this is expanding and that we're having these conversations in other spaces where people are starting to hear about organizations like the ones that you're both working with who are actually doing this work. So I actually want to talk about that as sort of as our third question, because I think there are lots of people who would love to know a lot more about this, because I think we have probably already challenged some very big stereotypes. So I'd love to talk about, first of all, any organizations or resources that either one of you think are really important for people who seek to be better allies. And I'd actually like to also ask the question, what are a couple of the things that people who wish to be allies to people who are queer and Muslim can do, especially if they are not members of the Muslim community? So looking for examples of resources and sort of here's what you should do next, or stop doing now, or something like that. So Noor, maybe could you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of orgs that I like to refer people to for this question. First, since we kind of have talked about intergenerational kind of divides and talking about how parents can help, and family members, of course, because we have big family networks. The Muslim Youth Leadership Council has some resources specifically aimed at Muslims who are learning about their gender identity and about their sexuality. So we currently have 2 brochures out. One is I'm Muslim and I think I might not be straight. And one is I'm Muslim and my gender might not fit me. So those are both really good resources to start with. And we're currently working on a resource for parents called I'm Muslim and I think my child might be LGBTQ. So thank you for sharing that link. Yeah, so we've got resources that are aimed at kind of teaching people. And we also recently put on, and we're hoping to do this again, a conference aimed at teaching people about our 4 bucket areas, one of which does include supporting LGBT rights and reproductive justice. So that's a great place to start if you're looking for people who are good for answering questions or who might be able to get you the 101 stuff. Next up, I would say Masjid Al Rabia, which obviously I'm biased, I'm part of it, but we are a group that focuses on inclusive Islam. We are women-led and women and trans-led and centered. And we have weekly programming both for LGBTQ Muslims, and we also have just a broader Quran study. And we have Jummah every Friday, which are Friday prayers. So we have a lot of opportunities for both allies and for people from within the community to come together and just share. I would also say Aruna plugged Muslims for Progressive Values. They're a really, really good resource if you're looking for especially local resources, because there's chapters all around the US. And they're also good if you're looking for nitty-gritty detailed explainers, picking apart the Quran and picking apart LGBTQ representation there.
Yeah, they're excellent at that. I've been on that site so many times. Muslims for Progressive Values has saved me so many times when I didn't understand something. So thank you for that one too.
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Please continue, Noor. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just going to, the one last one I'd like to plug is Masjid, which is the Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity. And they are just a really good big policy group that covers a lot of bases.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm sorry I cut you off. I get very excited when we get to talk about everybody. Aruna, what recommendations would you add to this list?
Yeah, so I think there's Noor really mentioned the major resources that are out there, but I did want to kind of make a distinction between the spaces that are accessible to people who are looking for a pan-Islamic identity, which is, a lot of like people raised here in this country are basically like, they feel connected to Islam in that context in many ways. The people that I'm also dealing with are also people who are immigrants. And so they're carrying, there's the religious piece and there's also the cultural piece. So there are people who are comfortable within perhaps their own national origin communities, or, for instance, like South Asians, which is the community that I'm representing. we sort of like, again, have our own like little cultural like sort of groups that are very familiar to us, and it makes a lot of sense for us to sort of understand within that context. So I think, and I think any PFLAG person knows this. It's actually really useful to families to first sound out these ideas and these concepts in a space where there are primarily allies.
Mhm.
And I say this because, you know, unfortunately, in our journeys, we are fumbling and we are looking for, clarity and understanding. And in the course of that journey, we can say and do very hurtful things.
Yes.
And so I think it's really important for families, Muslim families, all families, to be able to like access this ally-based space. And that is what I would like to see come into existence. And I'm so excited when Noor is saying there's a parent resource guide, because that really that would be a great first step in saying, okay, so here's, you're not alone. There is a community of people just like you whose kids have come out or not come out, or this is some place that you can learn from. So I wanted to definitely offer Desi Rainbow as a community resource. We are multi-religious, multi-ethnic. We're all from South Asia, and families are welcome to come and work out these initial, especially the initial portions of their journey. My hope is that all parents graduate from these, kinds of like parent affinity groups to like just being part of the entire community. But to begin with, for a sense of comfort and solace and being able to work things out before you emerge into this new world of allyship. I think organizations like ours are really important.
I actually want to ask thank you. I want to ask one quick question, because both of you have mentioned different generations participating in this conversation. And I don't want to assume anything. Is it your experience that younger people are getting to a point of acceptance and understanding faster because there is more out there? Or do you think the struggle remains pretty consistent and unchanged for people in general?
Noor, you want to go with that?
Sure. So I feel like it really depends on who you're talking to and where you're going. I would say that in my experience, a lot of younger folks have been more open to the idea of like queer Muslims existing and kind of doing their own thing. I wouldn't say that there's like the full-on cultural shift where people are totally comfortable and would know, for example, what to do if, say, someone really close to them came out to them, or et cetera, et cetera. But I do think that things are moving in the right direction, particularly as we get more feminist mosques and as we get more queer and trans-led mosques that are slowly starting to kind of move the conversation in the right direction.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I didn't want to assume, but I thought I didn't know if sort of the patterns of general acceptance were consistent across the board, because when we get into religion, it does change the conversation. I'm actually going to quickly check in with Liz, because I think we have a question or two out there, and I want to make sure we get answers to those. So hello again, Liz.
Hello. We do have a question here from Safe Libraries, wondering if you worry about reaction from people within your own faith who might disapprove or not affirm your queer identity.
I would say initially I was, when I first started coming out, because I relied a lot on the approval of other people to kind of validate my Muslimness and to kind of I pulled my respect for myself from other people. But over time, as I grew kind of stronger in my faith and my own understanding, I started to worry a lot less about other people. Islam is very much a community-driven faith, and that can definitely shape how people individually feel about this, and that's totally okay. But speaking just from my own experience, I've grown to care a lot more about my personal relationship with God and about just the way that my own perspective has shaped and made me grow as a person.
And thank you. And Aruna, could you talk a little bit about sort of the concern of parents, and the reactions that they get? Because I think it's a similar but not the same conversation.
Right, sure. And actually, I did want to, before that, just actually respond to that previous, concept that Noor was talking about. So I think he's very right about the fact that, younger folk, children, growing up in these households are dealing with a huge amount of conflict between, will my community, will my faith, will my parents accept me, versus, there's a peer community that is actually fairly like accepting. Um, I have actually heard from a lot of people who are completely estranged from their families, and there is a great deal of pain. They estranged both from family and from community. And again, I actually want to refer people to, I mentioned Kandil Javed. He's from Muslim Progressive Values in Boston. He's written a recent blog post which moved me to tears. It's on the MPV Boston, blog website, whatever it is. But it really talks about the fact that there is so much pain and so much anger, even though he is, obviously very comfortable with his own identity as a Muslim and is, very certain of his relationship with God. There is so much pain at the sheer lack of support from family and community. So that pain I've repeatedly heard. It's been expressed to me by people who are in their, sometimes in their 40s, who have weathered this process for a number of years. So I want to acknowledge that that pain exists and that the community has to do better.
Yeah, yeah, and I think people also realizing that this isn't just about where people worship, but it is in fact about the communities in which people live. It's so much more complicated than just one sort of element of life, and I think that's part of it. Liz, I think we have 4 minutes. Do we have time to do one more, maybe?
We do, and we do actually have another question. I think it's a really great question about any book or film recommendations that would help someone learn more about the experiences of queer Muslims.
Yes. So I would definitely recommend, there's a book called Halal If You Hear Me, which features a lot of poetry and stuff from different, yeah. It's a really good starter. I would also read, I'm still working on getting through this, but The Quran of the Oppressed has some good content about LGBT Muslims. That's a bit of a heavier read. I'm still getting my way through it, but it's a good starter. And I would also say there have been some books put out by queer Muslim authors in specific, whose names are conveniently fleeing my head right now. But I know that MPV has a book list of recommendations that they've also put out.
Yeah, I briefly wanted to plug, there's actually an actor that I've been following called Fazia Mirza. And she's been in a wonderful film called The Queen of My Dreams. It came out 2012. So I'm assuming that it's available on Netflix. Fazia is a pretty amazing person. She's an out queer woman who really has a wonderful social media presence for those of you who want to follow her. And I believe her family came from Pakistan. I'm not quite sure, but she's, again, a great role model for queer youth. And that film is beautiful. There's also a recent film, I'm so blanking out on it right now, but there's a recent Bollywood-style film that came out featuring a romance between a queer woman and a non-binary person who are both Muslim. And I believe it's set in, I'm not sure where it's set. Noor, do you know?
I'm losing the actual province.
I know those things at our fingertips. But Google Bollywood movie, queer romance, Muslim, and you'll find it.
Yeah.
So, and Jean Marie, I'll let folks know that that's the page for today's discussion, and then maybe we can talk to our speakers and get some more of these links and resources together and add them on that page.
We will do that. We will actually do that. So if everybody wants to go to the page where we have the article for today, we will actually build links to all of the things that we mentioned today when we all remember what they were, because you can never remember when this is happening. It always happens this way. So we will do that. Aruna, Noor, thank you so much. Please, we want to have you back to talk about this more. I wish we actually had another half hour to keep going. Thank you both for your work, and thank you for everything that you're doing. I really appreciate both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks,
it's great.
Marie.
Thanks, Liz.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
for today. That wraps up the broadcast for today. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a great conversation. We're going to do it again next week. I really am excited about next week too, because we're going to be talking about Pride music and queer anthems. So start working on your list of your favorite songs that you must play during Pride Month and frankly year round, because we have a really exciting guest on that one. So that will be again next Thursday, same bat time, same bat channel. And as we wrap up again today, I just want to remind us all of the things that the doctor has told us, which is to run fast, to laugh hard, and to most of all, be kind. My name is Jean Marie Navetta. Thank you so much for joining us at Something to Talk About Live.